Let's see. So, does anybody have any questions before we get going today? Any questions at all?
No.
Nope.
All right. Do you guys feel like you're understanding the material pretty well, or?
Yeah, so the only thing I'm trying to like I got the number 1 and number 2 navigate thing down. So the only thing I'm gonna kind of really study the hardest is that content of operation specification, or the spec or op specs. I just have to memorize that, and then the other question, it's like what is the required fuel supply for domestic? Yeah, I'm just gonna remember those ones for now.
Okay.
I don't think I'm having any problem understanding it. I'm just having a hard time remembering everything.
Right. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It really is. And it all gets dumped on you at once,
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, if nobody has any questions, we will get rolling here. So we're still in 121. We are very close to finishing that off. But let's see. Okay. So we left off, we had just read 655, I believe. Yeah, we had talked about applicability of reported weather minimums, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're where we need to be. Okay, so that puts us into flight altitude rules. And tonight I'm going to kind of have people just read it, and then we'll discuss it. If there's questions, I'm going to try that and see how that goes. So that being said, I'll start at the bottom of the list. And Mitchell, if you want to read the first one for us.
Under flight altitude rules,
altitude.
Notwithstanding 91.119 or any rule applicable outside the United States, no person may operate an aircraft below the minimums set forth in paragraphs B and C of this section, except when necessary for takeoff or landing, or except when, after considering the character of the terrain, the quality and quantity of meteorological services, the navigational facilities available, and other flight conditions, the administrator prescribes other minimums for any route or part of a route where he finds that the safe conduct of the flight requires other altitudes outside the United States. The minimums prescribed in this section are controlling unless higher minimums are prescribed in the certificate holder's operation specifications or by the foreign country over which the aircraft is operating.
All right.
Section B.
Yep.
Let me continue.
Go. Yep. Keep going.
Section B, day VFR operations. No certificate holder conducting domestic operations may operate a passenger carrying aircraft, and no certificate holder conducting flag or supplemental operations may operate any aircraft under VFR during the day at an altitude less than 1,000 feet above the surface or less than 1,000 feet from any mountain, hill, or other obstruction to flight.
Okay.
C.
Let's hold on for just a second. Okay, so this is just talking about, well, like it says, flight altitude rules. So basically all it's saying is that there's flight altitude rules and restrictions. And so for day VFR, even though we don't do day VFR, it's saying that under 121, we're not allowed to operate less than 1,000 feet and vertically and 1,000 feet horizontally. So 1,000 feet above the ground and 1,000 feet from any mountain, hill, or obstruction to flight. Are there any questions on that so far?
No, sir.
Okay. So let's keep going.
Night VFR, IFR, and over-the-top operations. No person may operate an aircraft under IFR, including over-the-top or at night under VFR at an altitude less than 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a horizontal distance of 5 miles from the center of the intended course, or in designated mountainous areas less than 2,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a horizontal distance of 5 miles from the center of the intended course.
Okay. So all that's doing is just opening it up to night VFR. We just increase that those minimums. Why do you think it's important to increase those minimum altitudes at night?
It's harder to see at night.
Yep. Exactly. So let's keep going.
Day over-the-top operations below minimum en route altitudes. A person may conduct day over-the-top operations in an airplane at flight altitudes lower than the minimum en route IFR altitudes if 1. The operation is conducted at least 1,000 feet above the top of lower broken or overcast cloud cover. 2. The top of the lower cloud cover is generally uniform and level. 3. Flight visibility is at least 5 miles. And 4. The base of any higher broken or overcast cloud cover is generally uniform and level and is at least 1,000 feet above the minimum en route IFR altitude for that route segment.
Okay. All right. So does anybody have any questions about any of that? It's pretty plainly spelled out. And since we don't do too much VFR flight, we're not too concerned about these two. And then as for this over the top, so over the top, we're going to talk about, these.
Sorry, I didn't. I meant. I accidentally sent you a request to share my screen. Sorry, don't approve that. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So basically what it's saying is we can't operate so we have to conduct operations at least 1,000 feet below the lowest layer of the lowest ceiling, right? Because we're talking the lower broken or overcast cloud. So that means ceiling. So why do you think it's important that we don't operate 1,000 feet below clouds?
Does that have to do with the 1, 2, 3 rule, the usually the 2,000 feet ceiling?
Not on this
No.
one. So the 1, 2, 3 rule only applies to when we're planning a flight, and that's to help us determine whether or not we're going to need an alternate destination airport.
Okay.
Is it because it seems like it can be a little dangerous at the fringes of any difficult to see areas, other aircraft, etc., popping up out?
Exactly. So the main reason why this is so important is because when we're operating that close to cloud cover, like you said, aircraft descending through that cloud layer will not be able to see you. So kind of one of the pilot things is see and avoid, right? So if you can't see them because you're descending through a cloud layer, 1,000 feet, you'll clear that pretty quick. So they're usually descending. I'm not sure what the actual descent rate is of a CRJ, but I know in like a Cessna, we would descend at 500 feet per minute. In a CRJ, I'm imagining that's a little quicker, probably closer to 1,000 feet per minute. So it's a pretty quick descent. You got less than a minute to avoid.
There's a few areas that are pretty dangerous. I got my private ticket back long ago in college, and there's just very dangerous areas, I guess, just like in cars on the ground. One of them was over VORs. So when you're coming in on VORs and you've kind of got a little bit of haze and things like that, well, guess what? Everybody's coming in on the VOR up and out. And so you really have to be watching because closure speeds are insane. So it's pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about these aircraft are traveling at, like the CRJ, they operate, at Mach, 7.5 is their cruise. So, that's 3/4 the speed of sound, right? So you have two aircraft closing on each other. That's going to be like 1,400 miles an hour, close to. A little, actually less than that. Sorry, that'd be about 1,200 miles per hour. So not a lot of time to react. And like you said, like VORs, they call that the cone of confusion, right? So, yeah. But yeah, so we want to stay 1,000 feet out from the bottom of the cloud, and then on top of the lower, the top of the lower cloud cover is generally uniform and level. Our flight visibility needs to be at least 5 miles. So yeah, it's just saying, basically stay away from the clouds. Try to stay out of them for these altitude restrictions. Okay, let's move on to responsibility for dispatch release, domestic and flag operations. And that will go to Matt.
All right. Each certificate holder conducting domestic or flag operations shall prepare a dispatch release for each flight between specified points. Based on information furnished by an authorized aircraft dispatcher, the pilot in command and an authorized aircraft dispatcher shall sign the release only if they both believe that the flight can be made with safety. The aircraft dispatcher may delegate authority to sign a release for a particular flight, but he may not delegate his authority to dispatch.
Okay. So this one's really important for us dispatchers. So what this is saying is that an aircraft dispatcher for 121 rules has to prepare the dispatch release, right? And then it's also saying that the pilot in command and the authorized dispatcher have to sign the release only if they believe that the flight can be made with safety. So whenever we create a dispatch release, both the pilot and the dispatcher sign that release. Let's take a look at what a dispatch release looks like really quick. Has anybody seen the dispatch release prior to this?
Oh yeah, they look pretty cool. I like looking at all the numbers, and it tells you all the waypoints and altitudes. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry, I gotta find it here. Okay. So this is what what we call a manual dispatch release. This is the information that they require. So yeah, so what's on the dispatch release? The date, the captain, the dispatcher. Is it an original release? If it's an amended release, so do you guys remember the difference between an original release and an amended release?
I can't say I do.
Oh, let me zoom in here too. Sorry, guys. So an original release is, say we create our dispatch release and we plan for certain weather at one of our alternates or even at the destination. Say when we did the original dispatch release at the destination, we were above the 1, 2, 3 rule, so we didn't require an alternate airport at the time. But let's say that the airplane is there. We send that dispatch release over 60 minutes before the flight start time, and then in that 60-minute window before the flight departs, all of a sudden we get a forecast that states that now we require an alternate airport. What we would have to do is amend the release. We don't want to have to completely redo it, right? All we're going to do is amend the release and basically make sure that we plan for the fuel. We're going to add the alternate airport, and we're going to run our numbers again and make sure that we're in the weight and balance of the aircraft, okay? So that's what an amendment would do. So is this
for the original release?
Yeah, so we would amend the original release for the added fuel, or even something simple as the pilot decides, the weather's going to crap at the destination. I just want to add more fuel to the airplane. We would amend the release and add more fuel. But yeah, it's just saying that we're keeping the basic structure of the original release. We're just adding something to it, okay?
Okay, got it, thanks.
So it also has our flight number, aircraft number, so our departure city to our destination city. If we were to require a takeoff alternate, we're going to place that there. If we have an alternate, we would put it there. If it requires 2 alternates, we would add our second alternate there. This is our flight level, so we're actually going to plan the aircraft to fly at a specific altitude, and that's going to generate all of our performance numbers. That's going to help us generate all of our performance numbers. Okay. This is where we would put the IFR flight plan. So an IFR flight plan, I'm going to just pull one up really quick, just so you guys can kind of see what it looks like. Okay. So an IFR flight plan this is kind of the same thing that we're going to fill out when we're planning our flight. But basically, we're going to file, this is what we're going to put in there. Even though we have these different waypoints that we're putting in there, this is what our filed route is going to look like, okay? We just have our waypoints and the airway that we use to get from waypoint to waypoint. Does that make sense? Does everybody see that? Or do I need to zoom in a little bit more here? Let's see if it'll open.
Oh yeah, I used to do those. Those are fairly easy.
Let's see if we can find a little cleaner one or view image. Okay. Let's see if we can zoom in here. Okay, does everybody see it? So this is what our filed route looks like, and this is what we'd put into that box is, you know, this information. Okay. Anybody have questions on that?
No, sir.
Okay, so this is where we put our filed route. Our ETD is our estimated time of departure. Okay. ETE stands for estimated time en route. So this is the time we're going to be taking off or pushing back from the taxi or from the jetway, right? So this is our pushback, our estimated time en route, and then our ETA is our estimated time of arrival. Okay. We're going to plan it to a speed. So this is where we'd put our speed. And then we're going to put our fuel amounts. You guys remember what our required fuel was? Can anybody say that?
Are you talking about like for reserve fuel or?
No, what is the required fuel that has to be on board the aircraft?
Enough fuel to fly to the destination, enough fuel to fly to the most distant alternate, or to fly for 45 minutes at normal cruising fuel consumption.
Okay. So this is how you guys are going to remember that one as well. So let me get my handy little pen here, even though it looks like a 2-year-old draws with it. So the way we remember our required fuel is this acronym. BAR. Okay. So the FAR states that we have to have the burn, right, to the destination. That's what we call our burn. Then to our furthest alternate. So if it requires 2 alternates, we plan the fuel, or we're going to plan the fuel to the furthest alternate is what we're going to put on this dispatch release, okay? So to our furthest alternate, why wouldn't we plan the closer one? It'll save us weight, right? If we plan to the closer one.
Have maximum fuel for the worst case scenario.
Yeah. So we want to put the most amount of fuel and restrict the weight of the aircraft. We want to add enough fuel on there that if, say, that first alternate, the weather goes bad at that while we're en route, our second alternate or our furthest alternate, depending on which one it is, our furthest alternate, we know that if we plan to our furthest alternate, we will definitely be able to make it to our closest alternate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have any of the alternates if you can't get to it.
Right. So to the furthest alternate, and then R is reserve. That's our 45 minutes of cruise, okay? We call that reserve. So burn, alternate, and then reserve. This is a lot harder than it looks to draw with this, just so you guys know.
You're doing great.
All right. Okay. Burn, alternate, reserve. You guys write that down, memorize it. So to throw...
So the way we know our required fuel is, and then blank, and that's all I need.
Huh?
So I don't know who said it, but you said that the way we know our required fuel amount is, and then I forgot the rest of that.
Okay. So our required fuel for domestic operations is to the destination, to the furthest alternate. So to the destination, remember you got to say then to the furthest alternate plus 45 minutes
Okay.
of cruise, right? And
Okay, yeah. I got that down.
the acronym aid that we're going to use to help us remember that is our burn, alternate, and reserve, or BAR.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Turns out I already had it down. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So at SkyWest, and the way we are going to plan our fuel, we're also going to add one more requirement to it. So if we add any contingency fuel, so contingencies like we're anticipating traffic delays, or we're anticipating for the aircraft to be held at some point in the route, whether that be at the destination or at the alternate. So if there's a point where the aircraft is going to have to like hold over an airport, we're going to add what we call hold fuel or contingency fuel. And that's just extra required fuel that's going to have to be on board the aircraft before the aircraft can take off. Okay. So all of these make our release fuel. So the way we're going to remember the hold fuel is just add an H. So BAR H. BAR H is our acronym for SkyWest. If a FAA or on your practical, when they ask you, this is what they want: burn, alternate, reserve. But remember that when we plan our flights in this class, we're going to add hold fuel to that release to make our release fuel. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. So as you can see here,
Makes sense.
taxi fuel in this class we'll just plan 15 minutes, or that equates to approximately 250 pounds. Now let's say that our en route fuel is 6,000 pounds. Okay. Our alternate will be an additional 1,500 pounds. Our fuel reserve, okay, 45 minutes, right? And I believe 45 minutes equates to, I think that's 1,500 as well, if I remember right. We'll go over this when we're doing our flight planning. And then we add another 15 minutes of hold fuel or contingency fuel. Okay. We'd add all of that up. Okay. So let's add this up really quick. 3,000, 9,500. Okay. This is how much we would tell the ramp, how much fuel we would tell the gate or the ramp to put in the aircraft, 9,500 pounds. Okay. Now, when the aircraft pulls on to the runway and is ready for takeoff, okay, before they even start their takeoff roll, they're going to look at how much fuel they have, and they're going to call out Minto fuel. Okay, and then the first officer will confirm whether or not they have this fuel. So remember, taxi fuel isn't part of our burn, alternate, or reserve, or our hold fuel. Okay. So that being said, taxi fuel, we're just anticipating that it's going to take about 15 minutes to get to the runway from pushback. That being said, when they roll, before they even start their takeoff roll, okay, this is where we put our bar H total fuel. They have to look down and see 9,250 pounds of fuel. on board the aircraft. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So their fuel gauge will tell them how many pounds of fuel they have in the aircraft. And if they see anything less than that, they have to turn around, go back to the gate, and add fuel, because they can't take off with anything less than that. Everybody understand? Anybody
Yep.
need to make any additional notes?
Makes sense.
Okay.
Garrett, I looked down for a second. So the taxi fuel then is on the other end of the trip, right?
And so taxi fuel is just, it doesn't count.
Destination.
So taxi fuel is at the departure airport. So we're just planning on burning that before we even take off.
Okay.
So if we get to the runway and we have 9,400 pounds, that's fine. We can take off. We don't have to do anything. But say we roll to the runway and we have 92,330 pounds, or 9,230 pounds on board the aircraft, we have to stop. Like, we cannot take off. We would have to go back to the gate and fuel the aircraft.
I guess what I'm saying is on the other end, you're going to have taxi and hold time. So that's built into that contingency, hold and reserve.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that we just don't even plan for. They're already at the destination, so we don't really care how much fuel they have at that point. Does that make sense? It's like, oh, you made it. You're back on the ground safely. So
I was at an airport and there was a lot of congestion and they had to come out and fuel us.
Yeah.
To get us to the gate. It was hilarious. We had to sit there and wait and go through all that. So.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that goes along with the passenger bill of rights. They are only allowed to keep you in the aircraft without taking off for so many hours, and they have to offer you guys certain things in order. Yeah, so that's a whole different mess, and we'll touch on that. I don't think we'll spend hardly any time on that, but yeah, we'll touch on that. So to add to this, the last thing that we're going to add to this right here, this burn alternate reserve and hold, what we call this, okay, see how this is minimum fuel for takeoff. And you guys heard me say this just a second ago. This fuel that they are required to have on board the aircraft before they can take off, we call that Minto. M-I-N. We'll just make this our T-O. Okay, Minto, minimum takeoff. So this one, you're just going to have to remember that these make Minto. So if I ever say Minto fuel at any point during the course, you know that that's our burn alternate reserve and hold fuel added together. Okay? Does that make sense, or?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. Everybody got it down?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll erase that all then. Okay. Oh. Still on my pen. All right. So that is a long way of describing that. But yeah, so. Oh, well, let's keep talking about. We weren't even talking about our fuel requirements at that point, but we went over some important stuff there. So we're going to keep going down the dispatch release. I just wanted to make sure you guys understood that part of the dispatch release. Takeoff data. So we're going to put our airport, planned runway, planned outside temperature, planned winds, planned maximum runway takeoff weight. Okay, so all of that information, we're just going to fill out these boxes. MELs, do you guys remember what MEL stands for?
Minimum equipment list.
Yep. So we would put any of our MELs in that section. Then
Just to make
any notes that are pertinent to the dispatch release.
So just to make sure, you said that to find the definitions, you look in 1.1.
Uh-huh.
Okay, like what is it? 1.1.
So if you're going to look it up in the on the internet, you'd type in. If you were to look it up on the internet, type in Title 14, and then Title 14, Section 1.1. Let's type that in just to make sure.
Okay. There we go.
Oops, I just want to make sure. So yeah, so it pulls up 14 CFR 1.1, and that's going to give you all of your stuff, definitions and abbreviations. Okay. Okay. After that's, huh?
Sorry, I was just gonna ask, for the flight plans, they're all computerized, right? We're just plugging in.
Yeah. So once we have completed dispatch training and we're working for like SkyWest, it will be all be on the computer. But while we're in dispatch school, we're going to do what we call manual flight planning. We're going to actually look at charts and use the spaghetti graphs and everything. So, or spaghetti charts and everything. So.
Okay.
All right. So once that's all done, so here's what that FAR we just went over actually goes about. After that's done, we are required to sign the release with the PIC, so with the pilot in command. Okay. The reason why that is because the pilot in command and the dispatcher are jointly responsible for the safety of the flight, correct? So if that flight doesn't make it in, it's not only on the pilot in command, but the dispatcher is going to be looked at as well, because we hold the same responsibility for that safety. Okay. So what this FAR continues to talk about is that not only do we have to sign that dispatch release, says that the dispatcher may delegate the authority to sign the release. So we're going to be sitting here, say if you get hired by SkyWest, we're going to be sitting here in St. George at headquarters. We can't go out and physically sign all these releases. So we can do like an e-signature, or, basically we can delegate the authority to say, yeah, this is my flight plan and everything that I've sent to you guys. But right here it says we're not we don't have the authority to delegate our dispatching. So us as a dispatcher, we can't say, I can't tell one of you guys, even though you're a qualified, certified or licensed dispatcher, I can't be like, hey, Matt, I did this flight plan, but, I don't think it's legal. What do you think? And do you want to dispatch it for me if you think it's legal? Like, I can't just be like shrugging off that duty, right? If I believe it's not legal, and I don't believe it's safe, then that's the end of it. Like, I can cancel the flight, I can delay the flight, but I can't say, all right, Matt, I don't think it's legal, but you take a look at it, and if you think it's legal, go ahead and dispatch it. Okay.
I'd get in trouble for that.
Yeah. We'd both lose our license. So, and that's also to protect us, right? Say the airline, say SkyWest, I don't feel like it's safe to operate the flight, but SkyWest is like, well, we need the revenue for this flight, so since you're too chicken to sign the release, I'm going to send it over to Greg's desk, and he's going to sign it for you, or he's going to dispatch it because you're not willing to help us out here. So
it also seems like that's good, kind of a balanced system between the pilot and the dispatcher, because when they're in the heat of the operation and they seem like, hey, I can do this, but they don't have all the resources and looking at the whole picture,
right?
That perhaps the dispatcher does. They get a little overconfident. Maybe they're tired. They want to get home. It seems like that's when all those accidents starts happening, when they just kind of rush the call. At least when I was a pilot, it's like when you start kind of getting a little overconfident and forgetting how there's no reset button. I mean, you can't pull over if something goes wrong. It's life or death. So.
Exactly, and I don't know if you guys remember me talking about the bowling alley accident, right? Where the dispatcher's like, well, the weather looks like a bowling alley, so if you're going to land, expedite it. We were talking about that the other day, and somebody said that I believe the pilot's girlfriend, not only was he at his duty period limitations, but somebody was saying that his girlfriend was in the terminal waiting for him or in the airport waiting for him to come out. And so he was just like, oh no, I'm landing here, So it can go either way. It can either protect the pilot. The pilot's like, you know what? I know you want to sign the dispatch release and you're saying everything's legal, but I don't feel comfortable with this aspect of the dispatch release. It takes both of us signing that release to make it legal, right? So if the PIC sees something that's not safe, or the dispatcher sees something that's not safe, regardless of how big of a fit that person throws, like the other person throws, like it takes both of you signing it. So if you don't feel like it's legal or that it's safe, then you don't sign it, and that's the end of it. Now, if you feel like a flight isn't safe and you don't sign a release, the only requirement is that you're able to explain why. You can't just be like, ooh, that flight looks hard. I just don't want to dispatch it because it looks like it'll be a pretty, time-consuming flight for me to figure out. Like, that's not a just excuse, right? That'll get you in a lot of trouble, probably fired from your job. But yeah, I mean, you want to be able to speak to the reason why you're not willing to sign that release. And in the practical, the inspector, if they give you a flight plan that's not legal, say you don't have weather or there's an MEL that won't allow you to fly or take off, if you find out that the flight's not legal, then all you have to do is you just go up to the inspector and you say, look, this flight's not legal to dispatch, and here's why. And then at that point, he'll, you'll talk about it with him, and explain yourself. So that's the exact same scenario that you'll have with an air carrier. Does anybody have any questions on that? We've kind of beat that one up pretty good, but it's extremely important to really understand that because it directly affects us, right? So this subpart V goes over our records and reports. Okay, so why don't we have, who is next on our list? Marisa?
I'm here.
Yeah, do you want to read this section 683?
Sure. A, each certificate holder shall, 1, maintain current records of each crew member and each aircraft dispatcher, domestic and flag operations only, that show whether the crew member or aircraft dispatcher complies with applicable sections of this section, including but not limited to proficiency and route checks, airplane and route qualifications, training, any required physical examinations, flight, duty, and rest time records, and 2, record each action taken concerning the release from employment or physical or professional disqualification of any flight crew member or aircraft dispatcher, and keep the record for at least 6 months thereafter. B, each certificate holder conducting supplemental operations shall maintain the records required by paragraph A of this section at its principal base of operations or at another location used by it and approved by the administrator. C, computer record systems approved by the administrator may be used in complying with the requirements of paragraph A of this section.
All right. So basically, to sum this up, what it's saying is that the air carrier or certificate holder is responsible for keeping the records, any records of each one of their employees, okay? And they have to keep those records at their principal base of operations, so at their headquarters, okay? So that those records includes our route qualifications, so approved routes by air traffic controller, the FAA, any training records, physical examinations. Pilots have to have medical certificates in order to fly. Any flight records, duty, rest, and time records. Okay, so it's basically saying that any records just need to be kept at headquarters. You can only use a computer system to keep the records if the administrators approved it. And then it says that as far as physical or professional disqualification from flight, from any flight crew member or aircraft dispatcher is kept for at least 6 months. Okay. As dispatchers, we're not required to undergo any physical examinations. So pilots, they have to have, at least SkyWest pilots have to have what's called a Class 1 medical certificate. So that basically says they have to have a flight physical, every 6 months by a certified doctor. And so if at any point in time the pilot fails one of those, they'll suspend his flying time until he can take care of the physical issue. But as far as dispatching is concerned, we do not have any medical requirements and do not require any physical examinations. So, aircraft records. So I'll read this one really quick. Each certificate holder conducting domestic or flag operations shall maintain a current list of each aircraft that operates in scheduled air transportation, send a copy of that record, and each change to the certificate holding district office. So airplanes of another certificate holder operated under an interchange agreement may be incorporated by reference. Okay. So this is just saying that we've got to keep a record of everything that's going on with each one of our aircraft. Pretty simple, right? Okay, here we go with another extremely important, huge FAR for dispatchers. And it is a test question, practical test question, interview question, all of the above. Okay. I'm going to have somebody read through it really quick. Then I'm going to give you guys a memory aid to help you remember this one. Okay. Who's next on our list? Jordan, go ahead.
Dispatch release may be in any form, but must contain at least the following information concerning each flight: identification number of the aircraft, trip number, departure airport, intermediate stops, destination airports, and alternate airports, a statement of the type of operation, minimum fuel supply. For each flight dispatched is an ETOPS flight, the ETOPS diversion time for which the flight is dispatched. And Bravo is the dispatch release must contain or have attached to it weather reports, available weather forecasts, or a combination thereof for the destination airport, intermediate stops, and alternate airports that are the latest available at the time the release is signed by the pilot in command and dispatcher. It may include any additional available weather reports or forecasts that the pilot in command or the aircraft dispatcher considers necessary or desirable.
Okay. So here we go to help you guys memorize this one. Now, nobody's going to get mad at me here, right? If I, well, it's not even spelled the right way, so don't get too mad at me. Okay. That's the acronym to remember. If you're ever asked a question, or the following question. So this is the question you would be asked at any given point in time, whether it be on a quiz, a test, by the inspector, or in an interview. This, if you're asked this question, what are the things required to be on a dispatch release? This is it, right? So here, so like Hoover Dam, it, okay. So
You're fine. We're all adults here.
Okay. Okay. You'd be surprised how many people struggle with this one. So departure, destination, intermediate, and alternates. Okay. So D stands for our departure, destination, intermediate, and alternate airports. Okay. Okay, everybody gets the gist of what I'm trying to scratch on there, right? Okay. A stands for a type of flight. Oops. So you have to list a type of flight. And what that means, and so a type of flight, type of flight means IFR or VFR. You have to specify that on your release. Okay. M stands for our minimum fuel supply. Okay. Also known as Minto. Okay. I stands for ID number or serial number of the aircraft. Okay, so identify. If you guys look over at this list, you're seeing that we're hitting all the points in this, right? So the last one is our trip number. Or flight number. So these ors on this side are like what you guys would probably refer to them as. So trip number or flight number means that the FAA, so the FAR states ID number, identification number of the aircraft, and trip number of the aircraft. But if we look on, let's take a quick look on our dispatch release here. What do you see it as?
Flight number.
Flight number, aircraft number, ID number, serial number. So any of those are interchangeable, but this is the way I want you guys to remember it, right? And this is exactly how I want you to write it. So this is exactly what my flashcard looks like. Is one side it says what's required on the dispatch release. What are the 5 things required on a dispatch release? And the other says, damn it, and it says exactly what you see here. And if you can define it like this is going to impress, the interviewers or like Greg and them. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, they actually understand it. There's people that, they kind of hum-ha around it. They're like, identification number, No, if you can be like, in your head, you say, damn it, I wasn't wanting to be asked that question, You'd remember departure, destination, intermediate, alternate airports, type of flight, whether that's IFR or VFR, minimum fuel supply, ID number or serial number of the aircraft, and the trip number or flight number. Everybody got it?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. Super, super important. Okay. Then what we'll say here at the end, the last part of this FAR is W. So weather, so WX stands for weather, is attached. If I ever spell anything wrong, don't laugh too hard at me. I kind of suck at spelling. I'm not going to lie. Okay, so...
It's okay, we're muted. We can't hear.
So just remember that these are separate, right? The dispatch release on this, do you see a spot where it requires weather? Anywhere on that dispatch release? No, right? There is no weather there. Our weather packet is always attached to the dispatch release. Okay, everybody got it? My fancy drawing? Okay, I'm going to erase it then. Okay, why don't we take... Is everybody good taking a 15 or 20 minute break for this break?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we call it an even 7 o'clock and we'll get back on. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Sounds good.
Indeed.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Is everybody back?
It probably won't.
Yep. Yes.
All right. Does anybody have any questions so far? Is everybody doing good? Okay. All right. So we're not going to really hit this supplemental operation. Once again, I don't want you guys to get confused with what we just went over here. No reason to really, go over it other than just, basically when there's a supplemental operation.
I think it's showing your screen.
Oh,
Are you trying to show?
yeah. Sorry. Sorry, guys. I remembered to press record though, so that's what's important. Okay, so supplemental operations. What's important to go over there is just a quick brief on remembering that supplemental operations require something else. They require a flight release, not a dispatch release. And then, they have to have things like the company name, the make, model, and registration number of the aircraft, trip number, name of everybody on board, pretty much. Because remember, they can't bring revenue passengers on board. So they have to have the departure airport, destination, alternate airports, fuel supply, type of operation, and then released as an ETOPS, they have to have a special requirement for that. Weather they have to have attached, and that's pretty much it. Okay? So here's another extremely important FAR. Just like the last one, okay? Who would like... Oh, wait. Here we go. John, looks like you're up.
I'm here. You hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Disposition of load, manifest, dispatch release, and flight plans, domestic and flag operations. A, the pilot in command of an airplane shall carry in the airplane to its destination, 1, a copy of the completed load manifest or information from it, except information concerning cargo and passenger distribution, 2, a copy of the dispatch release, and 3, a copy of the flight plan, and B, the certificate holder shall keep copies of the records required in this section for at least 3 months.
Okay. So here's the question you'll be asked that goes with this one. Okay. What are the 3 things that the PIC or pilot in command is required to have on board the aircraft to the destination? Your response would be the load manifest.
Hold on, will you repeat that question one more time? What are the 3 things the pilot in command what?
What are the 3 things that the pilot in command is required to carry with him to the destination?
To carry with him to destination. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Mhm.
So here are the 3 things that they're required to carry: the load manifest, the dispatch release, and the flight plan. Okay. Why not weather?
It's attached.
Right. Very good. It's attached to the dispatch release. Okay. Load manifest. What is the load manifest?
Cargo,
Yep.
like the cargo, people on board, the fuel, right?
Yep. Passenger distribution and where the cargo's placed isn't a concern, right? Basically, they just need. Have you seen a load manifest? I'm sure there's a couple of you that have probably seen a load manifest. John, have you seen one or?
No, I haven't seen one of those.
Okay, yeah, you're in maintenance. Maintenance what again?
Reliability.
Maintenance
Parts.
reliability. Okay, that's right. But Jordan, I'm sure you've seen the load manifest, right?
You know, I see them go past me, but I don't know that I've ever looked at one very closely.
Okay. You probably helped the pilot actually create the load manifest, though. You
Well,
get the pin.
I don't know if I have anything to do with that or not, I guess.
Have you ever walked down the aisle and counted where the passengers are in each section, or?
No, they don't. Very rarely do they have us do that main line.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe so basically what I'm trying to get at is I've seen it done. I've seen the flight
I've seen that
attendants.
on like SkyWest flights and the regional flights, but I've never actually had to do that on a mainline flight, I don't think.
Yeah, and it's something that probably the gate would probably do too, help out with getting the load manifest. But yeah, so sometimes on flights, the flight attendant will walk down the aisle and they'll count where the passengers are located in the aircraft. Sometimes they're, the pilot or the gate agent might tell the flight attendant to go and move a passenger. This passenger's got to move from this section to this section, or so many passengers got to move from this section to this section of the aircraft. Sometimes the gate or the pilot will request ballast to be put in one of the cargo areas. Yeah. So the load manifest is, we're going to do it in this class. We're going to do the weight and balance and the load manifest part of it in class. But typically the load manifest is put together by the pilot before takeoff. So yeah, and he has to carry that to the destination with the dispatch release and the flight plan. Okay. Anybody have any questions on that one?
Nope.
Okay. They might also ask you at the same time, like how long are they required to keep those documentation or that documentation, meaning the air carrier. So how long is the air carrier required to keep the documentation? Your answer would be 3 months. And that is an ADX question, by the way, as well.
Garrett, I've seen FAA walk on and confront pilots with proof of such too, several times.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is part of the FAA, and that they will check that. So the FAA at any point in time can board any aircraft and request that documentation from the pilot, and the pilot has to supply it. So you don't want to deal with the fines of that if you don't have it, and you're 121 carrier. That'd be a bad day. So the dispatch release and everything, we do it electronically, and we'll send it to the gate. The gate will print it out and give it to the pilot. There are times where the system's down and we're unable to basically do the electronic file. So in those cases, we have to call the gate. You know, for some reason the system's down at the airport or something's going on, but we'll have to call the gate, and we have a form similar to this one. It looks kind of like this, but we'll still plan the flight in the computer system. It'll run all the numbers for us, and it'll generate one of these sheets, but then we'd have to call the gate and we'd have to read, like they'd have a copy of like a blank piece of paper, and they'd actually have to write this in with a pen at the gate, and then the pilot would have to, hold on to that piece of paper during the flight. So, yeah, a little something about that documentation, I guess. So everybody understand this? They get it. They got their notes taken on that. That's something that you guys will need to remember. You'll get asked that in interviews, the practical, the ADX. So really important to remember this one as well. So this section just talks about the disposition of the load manifest, flight release, and flight plans. Okay. And this is talking, once again, supplemental operations. So this will just go through and just list basically who is in charge of receiving that paperwork for the supplemental operation. We're not going to really hit that one. Okay. Communication records, domestic and flag operations. Okay, so who gets the easy one? Yvonne.
Each certificate holder conducting domestic or flag operations shall record each en route radio contact between the certificate holder and its pilots, and shall keep that record for at least 30 days.
Okay, pretty self-explanatory, right? Yep, we keep transcripts of every one of our conversations, all of our ACARS messages. And it's kind of funny because I know we kind of talked about closing an IFR flight plan, right? We talked about that a little bit this week. When an aircraft doesn't close their IFR flight plan and they've been on the ground for more than 30 minutes and stuff like that, all of that information, these ACARS messages that we send to the pilot, all of that information is public record. So at any time, if that record is pulled for any one of our flights, and they see something on the ACARS messaging system that's not really professional or anything, it can get you into a lot of trouble. I guess there's been incidents where, you know, there's been certain things going on. We kind of talked about the passenger bill of rights, where if you're on the ground for so long, the ACARS messages, they get distributed to certain people the longer that the aircraft is on the ground. We call it extended taxi, right? So the longer it stays on the ground and doesn't take off, the longer it waits to take off, basically those more and more people get made aware. And as a regional carrier, we start notifying even like the majors, the actual metal will start, is what we call them. We'll start notifying them that we have an extended taxi at this airport, you know. And there's been times where people have said things in messages and talked about certain airlines negatively with the pilot, and those people have been fired for it because, you know, it gets to the mainline carrier and they're like, hey, that's pretty unprofessional and things you're saying are not good, so, you know, that person's got to go and stuff like that. I mean, it happens. So what's important is to remember that everything you do and say, all of that information is public record, and you've got to be professional 24/7. I actually have a cousin that's an air traffic controller, and all of their communications over the radio are recorded, and they are public record as well. He was telling me one time in one of our air traffic control classes that we took up at Salt Lake Community College, he was my instructor, and he was telling us that one time he was there was an in-flight emergency. A guy on board was having a heart attack, and basically what happened was, instead of the next air traffic controller approving a direct from one VOR to another, they were keeping them on the filed route. And my cousin, he kind of had enough and had forgotten to shut off his mic and had a hot mic. And he yelled over to the other air traffic controller, because they're all sitting next to each other, yelled over to the other air traffic controller that he saw doing this. And he's like, well, why don't you stick a knife in the guy's heart? You know, he's got to get down. Well, the FAA is listening to those recordings. He got pulled in and had disciplinary action for saying that over the radio. So just keep in mind that this radio contact is public, and you got to be professional. So,
does stuff like that happen often?
yeah, I mean, people get pretty relaxed. It's pretty shocking. I mean, just with any company, really. You know,
I mean, I get it. People are human, and
right.
Naturally you get to know each other and you talk, but.
Right. So.
Well, the problem is with this job, though, is you're always on the mic. It's kind of like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, people talk at work and joke and all that, but in this case, you're on the record.
Yeah. Yeah, and not only on record of the company, but you're on public record. So if there's ever a crash investigation or anything of that nature, and that gets pulled, that you've been saying things that are
obnoxious
or horrible, or, you know, just kind of like slamming somebody else or anything like that, is really bad. It looks really bad on you. It looks really bad on the airline that you work for. And they don't treat it lightly, you know. So
right, for sure.
So
that's something that I would say I see a fair bit. It is pretty surprising what happens behind the closed cockpit doors, and
disappointing that you see a lot of stuff like that you would think wouldn't happen in a professional workplace, but I see stuff like that all the time.
Yeah, and you know, it's a real thing, and people get in trouble for it all the time. So, just it's important to remember that you're on record. So, stay professional, stay classy, right? So,
Indeed.
So congratulations, you have finished up FAR 121.
Yay!
So we're going to do a quick review of a couple, or not a review, I guess, but we're going to go over these other FARs that we have. We're almost in the clear, almost done reading the dictionary every night. Okay, so we're just going to, these other FARs basically just reiterate a lot of the things that we've already talked about. So FAR 139, once again.
Do you want us to write these down?
Not what it says so much, but like Adam and I have said before,
just what it contains.
Yeah, pretty much just what it contains, and just so you have a basic understanding of where to look if you're asked about these subjects. So part 139 just talks about the certification of airports. So it just basically says what are the requirements of the airport,
Sorry, it's certifications of the airport?
Yeah, certification of airports. It talks about the application that they have to go through to for their certificates to be listed as an airport. The inspection authority. So this is talking about who's over the inspections, the FAA, right? Basically just says that the FAA, they're subject to random inspections of the airport by the FAA. Okay. Talks about how long their certificate, once they're listed as an airport, how long that certificate lasts. Any exemptions for the airport, deviations. So this is kind of like the op specs, right, for the airport. You'll see the FAA is really consistent in their documentation. A lot of even like your company manuals, the first two sections are pretty consistently, the first two chapters are talking about like your general requirements, and then they go over your like your chain of command, and that's pretty much across all FAA documentation. Just they go over some basic things in every one of their documents, but this talks about the records of the airport, personnel, paved areas, unpaved areas, the safety areas. So they've got to be able to maintain all of the things going on with the airport, and they've got to document everything basically. So does anybody have any questions about this section?
Nope.
Does anybody want to go in depth in any one of these, or everybody comfortable with, being able to say that 139 goes over certification of airports?
So I don't know if I needed to write this down or not. I wrote certification of airports, and then I just put underneath that just inspections, durations, exemptions, deviations. Do I need to write all that? Or?
No, not really. Just,
okay.
The important thing is just being able to say that Part 139 goes over certification of airports. So if you're ever asked a question, which you won't get asked a question from the inspector or anything, I've never been asked to look at any of this. but it's important to know where it's at just in case we ever have a question about, an airport. What is their maintenance procedures? What's required for their paved areas? What kinds of markings and signs and lighting are they required to have? Like, if you ever question that, this is the FAR that you would go to look at those requirements. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Let's go over 175 really quick.
Is that the signal?
What?
All right, so this just talks about carriage by aircraft. So in the ADX, this is where some of the questions come from, right? So more specifically, some of the things that you guys saw about unacceptable hazardous material shipments or requirements for hazardous material. This will go over some of that stuff. So this is just saying, carriage by aircraft, like what's allowed on the airplane. A lot of the carriers will have somebody that's specifically like not a dispatcher, right? It falls under our operations control, or the operation side of the airline, but it's not so much a dispatcher requirement to know all of these things. So we have a group that's dedicated, like say somebody has a question about, service animals coming on board an aircraft, like we just refer them to these people. Or say they want to bring a Mylar balloon onto the aircraft, like we would just send them over to these people if there's questions like that, and they would take care of it. And this is the part that they're under, that they have memorized, So yeah, it's just important to know where to find these. Once again, carriage by aircraft. So 175 goes over the things that we can bring on an airport or on an airplane. Sorry. Does anybody want to go over anything in here, or feel good being able to speak to that? There you go. There's some fun stuff. Transporting plutonium and radioactive materials.
What kind
Yeah,
of things can we have?
I was reviewing on the ADX stuff of yellow radioactive. How many feet? I think it's like 4 feet from general passenger area. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you get the passengers too.
Crazy.
Yeah, and the big things that they're concerned about are anything that's like extremely volatile,
Flammable.
like flammable or volatile, like nitroglycerin. If exposed to too high of a temperature, instantaneous, like spontaneous combustion is highly probable. Things like that. Like we don't want anything going boom or. So this just kind of goes over, like, you can bring so much of this ammonium sulfate if you're transporting farm equipment, like you can have this much on board the aircraft, but no passengers or things like that. So everybody feel good about that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Know where to find that information?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so we are going to go over this NTSB 830. So what is the NTSB again? What is their job? Or what does it stand for? Either one?
National Transportation Safety Board.
Safety board.
Okay. All right, so they're the ones that are investing accidents, making sure that we're all safe, doing all their...
We're writing this down too as well.
No. Basically,
Okay.
What you need to write down, what's really important to write down, is really this headline here. Notification. So NTSB Part 830 talks about the notification and reporting of aircraft accidents or incidents and overdue aircraft and preservation of aircraft wreckage, mail, cargo, and records. Okay, that's what this document covers. So this is what's going to define, like, you know, what is an accident? What qualifies an accident? Does an accident mean that we, you know, had a controlled flight into terrain and, you know, it was a complete loss of the aircraft? I don't know. We'll find out. What is an incident? You know, what qualifies an incident? It's going to define what an overdue aircraft is. You guys heard me say the overdue aircraft before, so this is where we find those definitions and what we're required to do when we encounter these problems. Okay. So let's see, who are we on now?
You go up just one more second. Oh, never mind.
Okay, so it looks like we're on you, Greg, if you want to read applicability.
Applicability, did you say?
Uh-huh.
This part contains rules pertaining to A, initial notification and later reporting of aircraft incidents and accidents and certain other occurrences in the operation of aircraft, wherever they occur, when they involve civilian aircraft of the United States, when they involve certain public aircraft as specified in this part, wherever they occur, and when they involve foreign civil aircraft where the events occur in the United States, its territories, or its possessions. B, preservation of aircraft wreckage, mail, cargo, and records involving all civil and certain public aircraft accidents as specified in this part in the United States and its territories or possessions.
Okay. So let's take a look at their definitions. It's a lot of stuff here. You don't really need to write anything down in this section. Just pay attention to what is being said. If you feel like it's something that you're interested in, you know, in kind of taking a note on, some of this stuff is in the ADX. You will get asked questions off of this document, but I would rely more on your ADX test prep software to provide those questions and definitions to you, because it's not something that we're going to really use as dispatchers. And when we do, we'll remember that, you know, if there was an emergency or an accident or something, we go to document NTSB 830, right? So definitions, let's see. Evan, if you could just read to just this section, basically. Are you able to?
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
sorry.
cool. You're fine.
As used in this part, the following words or phrases are defined as follows. Aircraft accident means an occurrence associated with the operation of an aircraft, which takes place between the time any person boards the aircraft with the intention of flight and all such persons have disembarked, and in which any person suffers death or serious injury, or in which the aircraft receives substantial damage. Civil aircraft means any aircraft other than a public aircraft. Fatal injury means any injury which results in death within 30 days of the accident. Incident means an occurrence other than an accident associated with the operation of an aircraft which affects or could affect the safety of operations. Operator means any person who causes or authorizes the operation of an aircraft, such as the owner, lessee, or bailee of an aircraft.
Okay.
What's the bailee of an aircraft?
I honestly do not know. Let's take a quick look. I've never been asked that before, so I've never looked it up.
I've never seen that word before.
So the aircraft owner, the bailer, delivers the aircraft to the maintenance facility. The bailee, aircraft owner, bailer does not transfer ownership of the aircraft to the maintenance facility. The maintenance facility accepts the aircraft based on an agreement with the aircraft owner and bailer. So basically what it's just saying there is that
Just another word for owner? Kinda?
Yeah, so more particularly in the transfer to a maintenance facility. So the owner's going to transfer, it needs to go in for maintenance. The owner's going to basically give the aircraft to maintenance. Doesn't mean they own it, just means that they are the ones holding the aircraft.
They're responsible for it, but they don't own it.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I believe that comes into play like when I was in flight training. Like we could buy into the aircraft. So we would own like a tenth of an airplane at the flight school. But the bailee would be the flight school, so they'd be the ones that are kind of holding the aircraft and maintaining it for us. It's just that when we wanted to use it, we were the owner, so we had priority over the bailee. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does now. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what it would be. So Corey, if you want to read that section down to serious injury, basically.
Okay, starting with serious injury?
No, from public aircraft down to serious injury.
Oh, okay. Public aircraft means an aircraft used only for the United States government or an aircraft owned and operated, except for commercial purposes, or exclusively leased for at least 90 continuous days by a government other than the United States government, including a state, the District of Columbia, a territory or possession of the United States, or a political subdivision of that government. Public aircraft does not include a government-owned aircraft transporting property for commercial purposes, and does not include a government-owned aircraft transporting passengers transporting for other than commercial purposes, crew members, or other persons aboard the aircraft whose presence is required to perform or is associated with the performance of a governmental function such as firefighting, search and rescue, law enforcement, aeronautical research, or biological or geological resource management, or transporting for other than commercial purposes persons aboard the aircraft if the aircraft is operated by the armed forces or an intelligence agency of the United States, notwithstanding any limitation relating to use of the aircraft for commercial purposes. Aircraft shall be considered to be a public aircraft without regard to whether it is operated by a unit of government on behalf of another unit of government pursuant to a cost reimbursement agreement. If the unit of government on whose behalf the operation is conducted certifies to the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration that the operation was necessary to respond to a significant and imminent threat to life or property, including natural resources, and that no service by a private operator was reasonably available to meet the threat.
All right. So basically, that's your definition of a public aircraft. That's a pretty long definition. But yeah, so the government doesn't own it. They're just borrowing it to do things like firefighting, search and rescue. You'll see a lot of civil air patrol aircraft, things of that nature. So, serious injury. Who wants to define serious injury for us? Let's see. CJ.
All right. Serious injury means any injury which requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours, commencing within 7 days from the date the injury was received, results in a fracture of any bone except simple fractures of fingers, toes, or nose, causes severe hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage, involves any internal organ, or involves second or third degree burns or any burns affecting more than 5% of the body's surface.
Okay, that is on the ADX. There's a question.
I think it just has that first part, though.
Yeah, so it asks you to define serious injury, and the one of the multiple choice answers
It's just, yeah, that first
is
part.
that. I believe there's also one that has the fracture. Like, what would fracture be considered? And
Oh, yeah.
I believe that's one of the questions as well. So, but I mean, the big part to remember with the serious injury is that it requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours within the 7-day period after the injury was received. Okay. So substantial damage. I'll read this part for us. Okay. Substantial damage means damage or failure which adversely affects the structural strength, performance, or flight characteristics of the aircraft, and which would normally require major repair or replacement of the affected component. Engine failure or damage limited to an engine if only one engine fails or is damaged, bent fairings or cowling, dented skin, small punctures, holes in the skin or fabric, ground damage to rotor or propeller blades, and damage to landing gear, wheels, tires, flaps, engine accessories, brakes, or wingtips are not considered substantial damage for the purposes of this part. So basically what that's saying is that it has to be like a pretty, well, substantial amount of damage. So if you had a hard landing and it like broke one of your wing struts or bent a wing or collapsed your landing gear, and caused more than just, you know, a small amount of damage, but like, you know, collapsed landing gear would be pretty substantial because you're affecting more than just the landing gear or the wheels or tires. Like, it involves the structural integrity of the aircraft. So, so yeah. So this is what we have to do to notify. This is our requirement. So, man, this information. I don't know that we need to so much go into depth with any of this. Basically, what we have to do is notify the NTSB only when this list of things occurs, okay? So any one of these things on this list, basically, we have to there's a requirement to immediately notify the NTSB.
Garrett, meaning dispatcher?
More specifically, the pilot in command. We can assist
Okay, so does he relay it to us or does he do it directly?
He would do it directly. And a lot of times, so unless we declare an emergency as the dispatcher, we won't be required to submit any reports. But in the case of like an emergency, say an airplane has mechanical problems en route and they notify us, the pilot in command can, if he has time, I don't know, he can declare the emergency. But there's times where, like, say there's a radio failure and our aircraft goes overdue, then we as a dispatcher at that time would declare the emergency. All we would be required to submit in our report would be basically the things that led up to us and the reasons why we submitted the report. Does that make sense? When it comes to the actual structural damage, you know, passenger loss of life and things of that nature, that wouldn't come from us. That would probably come from like just the air carrier. But the report we submit would basically just go over the things that led up to us declaring that emergency and the procedures we went through once we declared that emergency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So, information that to be given in our notification. So this goes over some of the things that are required. So we'd have to give the type, nationality, registration markings of the aircraft, name of the owner and operator of the aircraft, name of the pilot in command, date of the time of the accident, last point of departure and point of intended landing of the aircraft, position of the aircraft with reference to some easily defined geographical point. So we couldn't just say it crashed in northern Idaho somewhere. Like, we'd want to give them as much information that we could about the location. Numbers of persons aboard, number killed, number seriously injured, nature of the accident, weather. So a lot of this is going to, like I said before, is going to come from the pilot if he's alive still, or from like the air carrier. Description of any explosives, radioactive materials, or other dangerous articles carried. So we'd supply things like the weather, the position of the aircraft, last point of departure, and the intended landing area, and some of these other things. So, so subpart C goes over the preservation of the aircraft wreckage. Again, we aren't really concerned with this as the dispatcher. It's not really our job. We don't get asked to go out to the actual crash site. But basically, they don't. The NTSB, when the NTSB, when there's been like an accident, the NTSB does not want anybody to go in the area of the accident. So I don't know if you guys remember that flight in Germany, I believe it was, the Lufthansa flight. The first officer basically locked the pilot out of the flight deck and then crashed it into the mountain. Do you guys remember that? It happened like a year or two ago. Well, I guess it's been longer than that. Probably 2 or 3.
I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So you guys remember how big of an area that accident took up?
Sure, it was quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, debris can get scattered over miles, right? Basically, what the NTSB wants to have happen is they don't want anybody, if you find pieces of an aircraft or anything like that, they don't want you to touch it or pick it up or anything of that nature. They just want you to report it. And this should apply to you just as general public, believe it or not. There's times where people, just average Joes like us, will witness a aircraft accident. Me living under the airport, call it South Valley Regional now. When I was growing up, it was airport number 2. It's just south of Salt Lake International. Growing up there, I actually witnessed 2 aircraft accidents. No, actually, I take that back, 3. So
Sorry, I didn't know that was on. Sorry, I didn't know the mic was on.
Oh, you're good. So, yeah, we living under that airport, or there was 3 accidents that actually happened growing up. One of them, there's an aircraft climbing out of South Valley Regional, and an aircraft that had just taken off from Salt Lake International that had a midair collision right over my neighborhood. And there was debris and bodies and everything that just, the area that all this debris landed was over like a 10 nautical or a 10 mile radius. So, yeah. So when that happened, they asked us, like, on the news, and the police were actually driving around. They just told everybody to stay indoors, because the NTSB's got to plot where all these pieces of debris landed and try to find certain parts of the aircraft, and that will help them identify what the nature of the accident was. So, anyways, general rule of thumb: see an airplane wreckage, just report it as soon as you can. Reporting the aircraft accidents. So this just goes over our requirements for reporting the accident. If it's a civil, public, or foreign aircraft, you have within 10 days of the accident, or 7 days if an overdue aircraft is still missing. So if we can't find an overdue aircraft, we have to report it to the NTSB within 7 days. Which hopefully it doesn't take that long to report it, really.
I was going to say 7 days doesn't seem very urgent.
Right. So it's not urgent, right? But what that is just basically we're going to be caught up in, with search and rescue and any of the governing forces, FBI, whatever it was, we're going to be dealing with them. The NTSB will probably be there as well, but we're not required to submit our report until that time period. So they'll probably be involved in everything during all of the, starting their investigation, but that doesn't mean that we have to report it immediately. It just allows us 7 days to kind of get our heads back on us and put the report together. So, anybody have any questions on NTSB 830? Alrighty. Let's see where we're at. Why don't we take a break till 8 o'clock, and then we'll jump back on and take a look at some more stuff.
Sweet.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm really sorry about that. I've had my mic muted for the last 7 minutes. I've been talking and nobody's been responding, and so I was like, just going along with my thing. Sorry about that.
I was wondering because the screen was changing.
Yeah.
I was like,
Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, so over the next week, we're going to be diving into navigation. So if you go to your course outline, you're going to see, so we're going to start talking about time reference and location. You know, what is a universal time code? We're also going to, so this video that I just posted into the chat link here, it's going to give you a brief overview of what we're about to go over this next week. This is a really important part of the class. If you remember us talking about the 1 NavAid, 2 NavAid rules, well, we're going to actually go in and define what these NavAids are, what are the different types of ground-based navigation, what's the difference between a precision approach and a non-precision approach, GPS systems, all of that. So I'll start the video on my screen. I'm going to turn off the showing to you guys, but click on this link, mute your mics, and then once the video's over, we'll get back on and we'll have a quick discussion about the things in the video. So I'll give you guys about till 8:30, and then we'll get back on here and discuss it. Okay.